Hey everyone, welcome back, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. But before we dive into today's story, I have some thrilling news. I've just launched a brand new YouTube channel called Soulfell Chronicles, where I'll be sharing even more captivating and spine-chilling stories. If you love the kind of content we bring here, you're going to love it there too. Hit that like button, subscribe, and check out the link in the description. Your support means the world. All right. Let's get into it. It began so quietly, so innocently, that I almost didn't notice. At first, it was just a feeling, a whisper of something wrong. We had been married for years, and like every couple, we'd weathered our storms. But this was different. My wife, Sandy, had become a stranger. The laughter that once filled our home faded into an unsettling silence. Conversations turned one-sided, and the warmth between us cooled into a hollow distance. At first, I blamed stress. The fire that destroyed our old house had shaken us both, and moving into my grandmother's place wasn't exactly the fresh start either of us hoped for. But soon, the signs piled up, signs I could no longer ignore. Late. Nights at work with suspiciously vague meetings. A phone that never left her hand, always tilted away from my view. And then there was the wedding ring, or rather the growing number of times she conveniently forgot to wear it. I kept telling myself every relationship has its rough patches, but denial only lasts so long. The night everything changed started like any other, quiet, cold, and heavy with unspoken tension. When I pulled into the driveway, the darkened house seemed to echo the emptiness I'd been feeling for months. But inside, the clues became impossible to overlook. I found her in the bedroom, getting ready. But this wasn't her usual routine. The black dress was new, short, sleek, and designed to turn heads. The bold red lipstick, the towering stilettos. I barely recognized the woman in front of me. And when I asked her if we were going out, her answer sliced through me. "No," she said, without a flicker of guilt. "I have a date." In that moment, my world tilted. But if she thought I'd break, she was wrong. What happened next? Well, let's just say things spiraled into something neither of us saw coming. Stay with me, because this story is just getting started, but I chose to let her deal with her own mess. She pushed the garage door opener, and when nothing happened, she tried again. Frustration flickered across her face, but instead of pausing to think, she did the most typical Sandy thing imaginable. She slammed on the gas. The engine roared to life, and the car surged forward, crashing into the garage door with a metallic screech that made my skin crawl. The sheer force of the 454 horsepower engine was too much for the old door. The air filled with the sound of ripping metal and splintering wood as the car burst through the garage, dragging the shattered remains of the door along with it. But that wasn't even the worst part. Parked directly behind the garage, in what had to be the absolute worst possible spot, was a police cruiser. 2 officers had just shown up, responding to Sai's earlier threats to call the cops. The car plowed into the front of the cruiser with such force that it shoved the vehicle back several feet, leaving its front end crumpled like an accordion. One of the officers had just stepped out and opened the driver's side door when the impact hit. The door whipped back violently, knocking him off balance and sending him sprawling to the ground. His partner, a redhead I vaguely remembered from high school, was already in motion, yanking Sandy out of the car by her hair before she could even comprehend what had just happened. "Get on the ground!" the red-headed officer barked, her voice ringing out across the neighborhood. Sandy shrieked something unintelligible, flailing helplessly as she was dragged down to the pavement. She didn't even resist properly, just sobbed and cursed while the officer cuffed her. Meanwhile, I rushed over to check on the officer who had been knocked down. His nose was obviously broken, blood streaming down his face, but at least he was conscious. "Stay still," I told him, cradling his head to keep his neck stable. "Help is on the way." The next 20 minutes were a whirlwind of chaos. Curious neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, and some were bold enough to step outside and watch the spectacle unfold. Ambulances arrived with sirens wailing, and more police cars flooded the street. I answered questions, all the while keeping one eye on the madness around me. Sandy sat handcuffed in the back of another police cruiser, wailing, like a child caught red-handed. By the time the chaos settled, she was on her way to the hospital with a bruised ego, a stiff neck from the airbag deployment, and a rapidly growing list of charges: reckless endangerment, property damage, and assaulting a police officer with a vehicle, just to name a few. As for me, I stood in the driveway watching the wreckage of the beast being hauled away. I should have been furious, but honestly, I just felt relieved. This wasn't just about the car or the mess she'd made of the garage. It was about finally having undeniable proof that Sandy was her own worst enemy. After all her threats, manipulation, and arrogance, she had finally hit a wall, both literally and figuratively. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Later, she crossed her arms and glared at me as if I'd personally betrayed her, which was ironic given the circumstances. "You're leaving me with nothing," she finally snapped. "That's not entirely true," my lawyer replied smoothly. "We're willing to let you keep one of the bedroom sets, out of nostalgia." I could almost hear her teeth grinding. Without another word, she stormed out, leaving her lawyer to negotiate the rest. In the end, she got to keep her car, a portion of the money she had withdrawn, and not much else. Her lawyer knew they were in a losing position and convinced her to settle before things got even worse. When the judge finalized the divorce, he commended me for being proactive in protecting my assets, his polite way of saying that Sandy had been outmaneuvered at every turn. By the time the gavel fell, I was free, and Sandy was left to deal with the legal mess she had created by ramming the beast into a police cruiser. But it was never about revenge for me. It was about self-preservation. Sandy had tried to manipulate, intimidate, and bully her way into taking everything, but she underestimated me. She thought I'd just roll over and let her win, but instead I played the long game. And when it was over, I walked away with my dignity intact. After the dust settled and the ink dried on the divorce papers, I finally had room to breathe. At first, it felt strange, like I was stepping into someone else's life. For years, my routine, my thoughts, and even my happiness had revolved around Sandy and our marriage. Now she was just gone. The house was quiet, but not lonely. It was peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I could focus on myself and what I wanted, instead of constantly walking on eggshells around her. I spent the next few months getting my life back on track, fixing up the house, reconnecting with old friends, and rediscovering hobbies I'd neglected for years. It wasn't about distraction. It was about reclaiming the person I was before everything fell apart. One of the first things I did was start going back to the shooting range. It had always been something I enjoyed, but during the last few years of my marriage, I hadn't made time for it. On one of those trips, I ran into Sergeant Sweetie, the same officer who had arrested Sandy during the garage fiasco. Out of uniform and dressed casually, she was almost unrecognizable from the no-nonsense persona I'd seen that day. We struck up a conversation, and I found out she was single too. Her divorce had been messy, though not quite as chaotic as mine. One thing led to another, and I asked her out. To my surprise, she said yes. That first date was something special. I showed up in my best suit, probably overdoing it, but she seemed to appreciate the effort. Early on, she made it clear that she wasn't interested in games or drama, and honestly, neither was I. 9 months later, we got married, and I can genuinely say it's been the happiest time of my life. She's not just my wife, she's my partner in every sense of the word. We've built a life together based on mutual respect and trust, two things that had been missing for far too long in my previous marriage. As for Sandy, I heard bits and pieces about her through mutual acquaintances. She remarried twice, and from what I gathered, her second husband seemed to keep her in check. Good for him, I guess. I don't hold any anger toward her anymore. It took me a while to get to that place, but I realized that holding on to resentment would only keep me stuck in the past. These days, my life is simple and fulfilling. My wife and I recently celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary with a river cruise in Europe, a trip she had always dreamed. Our kids are grown and thriving, and I couldn't be prouder of them. Just last week, we handed over my grandmother's old house to our daughter as a wedding gift. It felt right, like a full circle moment. That house had been the site of so much pain and transition, but now it was the start of a new chapter for her. Every now and then, I think back to those chaotic days with Sandy, not with regret, but with gratitude. They taught me a lot about who I am and what I'm capable of handling. Life doesn't always go the way you plan, but sometimes the unexpected detours lead you exactly where you're meant to be. And standing here now, I wouldn't change a thing. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.